Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amyr Rocha-Lima.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast is brought to you by Holland Hahn Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Hahn Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. I'm joined today by Bianca Effemey. Bianca is the founder and chief executive of Momentum Children's Charity. What's unique about Bianca is how she draws on her experience as a receptionist at a children's cancer ward, focusing the charity's efforts on being able to support families in a holistic way. And be sure to listen to the end, where Bianca shares with us how you can get involved in supporting the charity's efforts too. So whether you're interested in knowing more about Momentum Children's Charity, or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful local charity project, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. Welcome, Bianca Effemey, to the Inside Kingston Podcast. Bianca, I'm really excited about this conversation because, well, one of the goals of the Inside Kingston Podcast is to highlight community leaders who are championing great causes locally and beyond. And it's great to get a chance to hear from you and to learn from your expertise in this area. But before we kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. So Bianca, where did you grow up?
Oh, I grew up in Eastbourne.
All right.
So with my family, with my mother and father. I was born in London, but moved to Eastbourne and stayed in Eastbourne till I was 18. And then I moved very quickly to London to train to be a nurse.
Fantastic. So after sort of secondary schooling, is that what you did? You went to London to study nursing?
Yes, yeah. I went straight to Westminster Hospital and trained there to be a nurse. So that was my goal. That's what I wanted to do. So that's what I did. And I haven't really, apart from going to see my mother in Eastbourne, I haven't really gone back that way. That's, I like being where we are in Kingston upon Thames. Love it here.
Absolutely. So, very nice part of the world. And of course, nursing is more than ever now in the eyes of everybody, a very noble profession. So could you tell us a little bit more about your career journey before setting up Momentum's Children's Charity?
Yeah, of course. I've done a few roles actually. I left school at 16. I then worked in a children's home in Eastbourne. I then did that for a couple of years and then decided I'd quite like to progress and get some sort of training. So I went to London and trained at Westminster Hospital, became a nurse. I loved that. I did a little bit, I gave up nursing after a while and became a medical sales rep. I then worked, I then had family. So I had my two boys and in that time really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I took a part-time job at John Lewis. I did that for a while and then decided that I would look for something different that would fit in with my children and their time at home. So I saw a job at Kingston Hospital that was advertised and applied for that as a receptionist on a paediatric department. Didn't really even think about going back into nursing. It wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I thought that this would probably be good and it'd be a filler for me whilst I decide what I want to do. But starting a charity had never even occurred to me at that point.
That's amazing. Very varied career as well. So exposed to different facets of not only your world in the sort of healthcare profession, but also sort of in different roles within hospitals and things like that. So that's quite amazing.
I think it's just trying to find out what I was good at and what I could stick to. Well, so I found that now.
Yeah. Well, Bianca, actually, to bring this conversation to the present, I wanted to have a chat with you about, firstly, the beginnings of Momentum Children's Charity, which I think sets the scene for the amazing work that you guys do. Am I right in saying that about 15 or 16 almost years ago, when you set this up, the initial goal was it sourcing a fridge freezer for a little girl's hospital room? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. At the time, I was a receptionist, and I was not good at being a receptionist. In fact, I was probably the worst receptionist that one could employ. I found myself mostly talking to the families and going into the rooms with the children. That's where I was most comfortable. And I saw families come in that, walked in looking quite well, and then sort of heard from, you hear things around the ward, what was happening, and hearing that children were being diagnosed. And you can't sit there and not feel something. You just think, you have to put yourself in that position and think, God, what would I do if that was me? And how would I cope? And there was one little girl who was just so amazingly brave. I mean, they're all amazingly brave, but at that point I didn't know about any of the others. I could only concentrate on her. And she had made a comment to me that, her mouth was so sore because as you go through treatment, you can get ulcerated mouth sores, and it's very difficult to swallow. It's very difficult to eat. And she just wanted something cold, whether it be a jelly or whether it be a cold drink or whatever. She just wanted something cold. And in those days, it wasn't that easy just to go off and buy that. And as a parent, you don't actually want to leave your child's side. You want to stay there. So everything is hard. Everything, the simplest of things become hard. So it was time 16 years ago when they started bringing out these fridge freezers, or fridges that sit on top of units for children. And I thought, if I could get one of those for this room, then she could have cold drinks or cold jellies whenever she wanted them. So I went into John Lewis and we asked whether they could supply a fridge freezer or anything for an isolation room. And they were just amazing and said, well, we can't because you have to be a charity. And so we said, how do we become a charity? How do I become a charity? What do I need to do? And they explained, you just go online, you fill out an application form and you just do that. Well, that even to me was complicated because I'm not very good on technical things like that. But I had become very friendly talking to two other parents who had children with cancer on the ward, and approached them and said, what do you think? Should we do it? Can we do it? And we'll just do it for 2 months just so that we can get the fridges for the isolation rooms. And hence, that's exactly what happened. We filled out an application form. We came up with a name around a kitchen table, processed it, and we managed to get the fridge. And there were a couple of them for the rooms at the Kingston Hospital, for the isolation rooms. And the joy that came to that child's face was just amazing. And then I remember sitting there thinking, well, that actually wasn't that difficult. So what else could we do? And then it's sort of spiraled into a garden and all the other things that we've been doing. So it was never really intentional. It was never even thought out. It was just, it happened. And 16 years later, it's fantastic.
That's an absolutely amazing story, Bianca. Hence, I sort of prompted you to tell it here to our listeners. I think that says so much about the impact that one can have with little gestures. And no one better than somebody like you in the position you were as a receptionist in one of those wards to actually see the difference, the huge difference that small gestures like that can make. So I just think that's a phenomenal story. Could you tell us a little bit about Momentum Children's Charity today and some of the projects that you guys are championing?
Yeah, of course. Today we are, we're a bigger charity. And with that comes, different hurdles and different things. But we work in partnership with local hospitals who refer families to us following a child's diagnosis. And we have family support workers who are working in all the different hospitals to support the families in there. But you see, we believe very strongly that any child who has cancer or a life-limiting challenge or life-changing condition should never have to cope alone. So with that, we have to provide a structure around that so that families do not feel alone and that they're always supported. It's important to me, and I think it's important to everybody in Momentum Children's Charity, that actually we need to find out from the families what is needed to make that change. We can't decide. We haven't got children in those positions. It's going out and finding out from them, what can we do to make life easier for them? So we have services that we can help them with, which is counselling and a range of creative therapies, such as play, art and music, which we can put into the hospitals and we can put into their homes as well. So there's a link so that when you go into hospital, you've got something going on, and when you go home, we can take away the pressures and you can still have the counselling, you can still have the music therapy, and you can still have the art. The stress that was relieved from that is enormous. Just to have somebody to help you out and take away some of those worries is what is needed. And we can't think that the NHS can provide and pay for that all the time, because they can't. So this is where we can help out. Also, it's important for me, and it was always very important at the beginning, that we don't have a time frame to this. So if your child is diagnosed and you need help, who am I to judge when that help is needed? You know, I can't say, well, it can only be for a year or it can only be for 2 years, because what goes on in a family in that period can go on for years. So we try and keep that sort of family feeling, that family unit, that we are there for them. We also went into offering support with bereavement, and that's very, very, very important to us, that most children do survive and most children do get better, and we must never, ever forget that. But if you do lose a child, it's very important that you're not forgotten, and that there's the people who supported you all the way through are still there for you afterwards. So we have that structure as well, which has been immensely successful. We have holiday homes in the New Forest. So we've got 2 holiday homes in the New Forest, which families can go to. And we have a boat on the river so that you can go up and down the Thames. And we have a wonderful bunch of volunteers who go on and they either make teas and coffees for the families whilst the boat's moving. And we have skippers that are trained up to take people safely along the river. And if a family should want to sleep on that boat, it's got a bedroom. In fact, it's got room for 4 people to sleep on that boat. Wonderful moorings in Shepperton Marina. And on the day trips, we provide teas, we provide coffees, we do champagne for the parents if they're going to have a day out for themselves. So it's always trying to think out of the box to make things different.
I think that's amazing. And full disclosure, I mean, at our firm, Momentum Children's Charity was our Christmas charity that we promoted internally to our staff, but also to all of our clients. We're just big believers in the work that you guys do. And Bianca, I think the examples you've given us there, and also that lovely story that you shared with regards to the beginnings of the charity, it goes a long way to making our listeners more aware of the work that is done through Momentum Children's Charity. But for the benefit of our listeners, could you expand on that a bit? Could you give us some more examples of the work the charity does so that our listeners can start picturing how supporting Momentum's Children's Charity is actually supporting the beneficiaries of your actions?
Yeah. So each family support worker has roughly about 20 to 25 families each to look after. That is their family for as long as that family needs it. Pre-COVID, things were very different. So we would go to their houses, we would meet them, we would introduce ourselves, and we would have a plan for that family so that that family knows that throughout their treatment, they've got things to look forward to. They've got a point of contact, and that point of contact will also be the point of contact in the hospital. So it's not so separated. It feels like, that we are part of the hospital and we're part of their home life. So there's a great connection there. It's not just about the child going through cancer or life-limiting condition. It's about the whole family. It's about the mother, the father, the siblings, the grandparents. Everybody gets affected. So for us, we want to make sure that all those people are supported. So if we're going to send something to a child who's really suffering, let's think about the sister, the brother who is left at home, who has probably been feeling isolated because the mum and dad have had to be at hospital so long and the grandparents might have had to step in. They're also going through an awful lot. So we need to think of the whole family. And that's what I think is so important with the charity, that's what we do. If they want to have a break, some of these children are used to having lovely holidays and going off and flying off, and some never had a holiday. And the New Forest is set up with 2 absolutely beautiful cabins. We have to make sure that they are above average. We have to make sure that they are so clean. So an awful lot of work has to go into all of that. We have to make sure that the view in these cabins is beautiful, so that when you look out, it's surreal and you get time to yourselves, you get time for reflection. So all of that is taken into consideration when we work with these families. Counselling is huge. There's just not enough counsellors. There's just not enough funding for this. So for us, it's important for us to get funding for that, so that we can find the counsellors. We make sure that each counsellor has a real background about the charity, a real background about the family that they're going to go and support. And we then are able to fund that so that the family have that professional help that is needed. Many families have taken up music therapy and art therapy. So these are professional people who are trained in music or art, which can bring in the psychology of a child's emotions and their siblings throughout their time with us. And there again, we can find these people, we can put them into the people's homes, and we have to go out to find the funding. If you take all of that away, it's a huge part of momentum that would be empty, because those are the things that are really, really, really needed. Those are the things that the families call upon us for so much. The little things like we have an owl, a wonderful gentleman who takes a real owl to people's houses to do doorstop visits in this time of COVID. That's been just amazing. A fairy. We went out and we found this amazing lady who has a fairy house, and she does live Zooms with little girls so they think they're in a fairy's house.
Wow. We
have a gentleman who set up magic on Zoom and working with our families. And each one is tailor-made. It's not that every family gets exactly the same package. It's tailor-made for that family. And that's what, when you ask the families, what have we done? What have we done well? Those are the things that they really want. Those are the things that really matter.
That's amazing, Bianca. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. Bianca, you mentioned there COVID. Would you mind telling us how COVID has affected the charity's fundraising activities? And I guess more importantly, what is it that you think our listeners can do to help?
When we first went into lockdown, it was just like the darkest cloud that came over us. I mean, for everybody, of course, for everybody. But if we're only talking about charities and, us at the moment, it was just like, what are we going to do, and how are we going to support the families, because children will still get diagnosed. Families still need help. And we get a lot of our funding from events, and all the events just crashed. I mean, they just cancelled overnight. And we just thought, how are you going to get this money? What are we going to do? I have the most amazing, amazing team. And I think lots of people say that. And, it's fantastic when you can actually go into a crisis like this and look back and think, wow, we all just sort of came together and, had just decided that we had to keep going. Whatever happens, we will keep going, whatever it takes. So for the families, we did the doorstep visits. We got the owl out. We got people dressed up as Superwoman and Superman and everything on people's doorsteps. That was fantastic. We had to think about how are we going to get money in? How are we going to raise money? So we went for trust funding. So that's been, that has still come through. We had amazing Peaky Blinders Joe Cole, who did a cycle for us and raised an enormous amount of money. We begged on everybody who could think of ways to raise money, cake sales or doing badminton over their garden fences and everything. Just think out of the box. And within that time, people were doing everything to help and money started to come through. Not what we had before, of course, and you wouldn't expect that. But as long as we can keep going and as long as we can still look after our families and as long as we can, still think and you plan for the future, that's all we ask. And there are so many different ways to raise money. Our website in itself will give you a wealth of information on how to raise money for us. There are quizzes that you can do at home. There's wine tasting that you can do on a Zoom and raise money. Get the children out doing something, so many jumps in the garden, or there's so many different ways. And it doesn't matter how much it brings in. It doesn't matter if it brings in £10 or £20 or £1,000. It so makes a difference. We were still allowed outside, so walking and having a challenge whilst you're walking. I mean, I did the marathon, and if you'd seen me or met me, you wouldn't think that was going to happen. But, I did it. I did it by walking. But wow, the feeling that I got after doing it was fantastic.
Amazing.
But let alone I was raising money.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And, what a feeling it is to be able to do good and actually keep yourself and your own personal mental well-being well by engaging in an activity that is helping others and is helping a very, very worthwhile cause. So that's really, really excellent, Bianca, and I appreciate you sharing even some of those ideas with our listeners.
Just say, I think for a charity to be given this privilege of being able to speak and open up and sort of talk about something that's so passionate to all of us who do know the charity is fantastic. So I want to say thank you to you for that.
No worries, my pleasure. Bianca, again, I appreciate you sharing those examples with us. Now, there is a particular part of your charity's work which is actually going into the bedrooms in the wards and doing work in there with the children and the families. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. I think it's always very interesting when you see a child walk onto a ward, how they react, how they feel. Do they want to take those steps further forward, or do they just want to run away? And, just a little bit of paint or colour can make a lot of difference. So we looked at, I always talk about Kingston Hospital, and that's just because that's where it started. But actually, you've got to remember now, this is across many hospitals now. And the large hospitals, a lot of really large hospitals have the most amazing paediatric wards, and that's fantastic. In the smaller hospitals, you don't get that because you just don't get the funding to do that. But yet children are still going in there very, very poorly, and children still go in for a very, very long time. So to make the environment different can make the difference of a child walking into the ward and wanting to actually turn directly backwards, or a child walking in and going, actually, this is actually quite nice. And, let's look around that corner and see what's around that corner. And that's what we've tried to do. So if I was to take you on a walk around 3 or 4 of our hospitals, you'd walk in and you'd instantly sort of feel welcomed. You'd instantly see lovely colours and almost like a story taking you to the next place that you've got to walk. and eventually to your bedroom, which we would hope that in all our hospitals at some point, all the isolations will be done up beautifully with a theme. So a hospital can choose from our themed sort of book that we've got with all the different designs and what they would like. And we'll put that into the wards, into the rooms. And it changes the room from being, I don't think it's fair to say unwelcoming because everybody tries their best, but makes it their room. And one particular room at Kingston that we did up, which was the oncology room, and you would actually hear children run because they wanted to go into that room because it was magical. It had magical lights and it lit up almost when you walked in. And children thought that that was their room. And they didn't actually think they had to share it with other children who were coming in for oncology. They actually thought that was just there for them. And that's amazing. You know, we've even had families who've said, can we take this room and put it into their bedroom at home because they've loved it so much? Well, I think that if you can leave hospital and you come away with a positive, hold on to it and let's do more of it.
Absolutely. And, you know, I know exactly what you're saying, Bianca, because I've had the chance to have a look at your website in some detail and some of the work you guys do. And I urge our listeners to do the same. You know, it transforming what in the best of circumstances is still a hospital room into, as you described, into a magical room, especially for children who are going through such a difficult time with the causes that you support, is just fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, especially now because of what we're in now, the situation we're in now, you know, and these nurses are working beyond belief. I mean, just horrendous. And I realise that it is intensive care and, you know, frontline. But when you've done something like this, it doesn't just help the children and the families, it actually helps the nurses. You know, it's a great environment for them to work in. And, you know, we put in a teenage room and it's terribly funky. And it's actually, sometimes it's the children that design those rooms and they give you sort of a shopping list of what they'd like. And when you look at it, you think, oh my goodness, they've got some very expensive taste. But actually, so many people get enjoyment out of that, not just the families, but everybody within that environment enjoys it.
Yeah, absolutely. Bianca, you've obviously had a varied career going from the public sector, healthcare, to private sector, and now to the charity sector as well. What are some of the key business lessons you've learned throughout your life?
Wow. I don't know if it'd be fair to say business that I've learned. I suppose the biggest thing for me to learn is that I'm very impulsive and I want everything today. And I've had to learn that actually life isn't like that. And, you know, you have to sort of work things out. And I have a team that actually control me very well and make me much less impulsive than I am and try and calm me down a bit. So I think I've learned that. And to learn that, go with what you think is right and what your heart tells you to do it, and don't think you can't do it, because what has been achieved here is not just me, it's a team of people. It was an idea, go for it, you know, work really, really hard at it and it will be successful. So I'm, you know, always before I think I probably would have given up, but actually this time I'm so focused with the charity that I've learned so much from it. I've learned so much from the families. I mean, they've taught me everything, really.
Wow, that's fantastic. And when you look back at your career journey to date, what are you most proud of?
I don't think that there's one thing that I would say that I was most proud of. I think that if I could find a positive out of the situation that we're all in now, I would say that this time now, having worked with such a dedicated team, to see us all pull together when we've cried and we've laughed, and the extraordinary lengths that people have gone to help us, and the families, how grateful that they've been to receive any help during this time. I think that's a lot to be proud of, but not me. I think everybody should be proud who's been connected with it, because it's just shown that we are so strong.
Absolutely. Bianca, what next for you and your charity? Are there any projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Yeah, we've always got projects. We've always got things that we want to do. So we want to be able to do what we've done in our hospitals and rectify that in other hospitals. So broaden what we're able to do well. I'd like to see more hospitals done up and, have the services in, but be able to make sure that each hospital is looked after really, really well. And I think I've learned that let's stick to what we're good at and not try and make it too big, and that we can't do everything as well as we do it now. I think at the time, there were times, if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have said, oh, I want to take over the world. I want to do this in every hospital, and I want to do this and that. And, I think now I've really learned that doing things really well is important. So making sure that we've got the right counsellors, making sure that if we need we will need another holiday home. Without a doubt, we're going to need another holiday home. So that will be in our plans for the future. The boat, the boat is just amazing. Do we need to look at another type of boat? So all the time we're sort of working to see what the family's needs are. So I think that in a quicker answer, yes, we would want to see more hospitals, more services, more family support workers to provide the same service that we're able to do now, but in other places and other areas.
Exciting times ahead.
Yes, let's hope so. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, Bianca, what do you do to relax outside of the office?
Ooh, since my walk, I've suddenly taken up to love walking. So I love going for a walk. I find that it's made me appreciate living in Kingston, what is on your doorstep. You don't actually need to get in the car. I think I've sort of shocked myself that, that I even notice things that are far more beautiful now than I noticed before. Walking in Home Park. It's just on my doorstep and it's just beautiful. So that helps. Pre-COVID, I love the theatre. I love going to the theatre, and I miss that, and just hope that life in the theatre world will come back. And I like watching television. So those are my sort of relaxing things that I like to do.
Very cool. Are there any books that you've recently read that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Well, I'm just in the middle of one now called A Lying Life of Adults by Elena Ferrante, if that's how you say it. And that's rather a lovely book about a 12-year-old girl brought up in Naples, and she overhears her father sort of talk about her as if she's very much like his sister or his aunt, and not in a good way. And it's a beautiful book. I always quite like to read things that I could imagine is real and that could happen. So that's a lovely book.
Cool.
But I'm only halfway through it.
Yeah. And you mentioned watching TV there a second ago. So are there any TV shows that you've recently watched that you'd recommend?
Oh, The Serpent. I loved The Serpent, but I'm afraid I'm a bit of a binge watcher. So one should only watch one episode and then sort of let them last over the few weeks a bit. But sadly, I'd quite like to watch 2 or 3 episodes and then you realise that actually you've done it all, and what are you going to watch next? So it's Black Narcissus, I think it said.
Yeah.
The Pembrokeshire murders, I think, start tonight. So I'm going to be looking forward to that. And Judge John Deed, somebody lent me some videos of that, so I've been sort of looking at that as well. So a few things.
Oh yeah, those are great. And finally, where can people go to find out more about you and your charity?
The website is always a great source of information. So if they look at our website, that'd be great. And that's www.moment-umformother.org. And that will tell you everything about the charity.
And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure that I add that link to the show notes.
Thank you.
Bianca, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Thank you very much. And stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.